I built the ultimate cathedral in Minecraft. This project took me over 63 hours of work, and it is my biggest ever Minecraft build. This project was absolutely insane, and I couldn't have done it without the help of my good friend Caesar. We've been building together for over 10 years, all the way back in the Xbox 360 days, and he honestly was a lifesaver over this project. Now, let's get into how exactly we accomplished this task. We started, as all things should, with a gargoyle. I've never built in this style before, so it was a bit of a learning curve trying to get the proportions right, so eventually Caesar popped on to help me figure the whole thing out, especially the wings. We didn't end up using this gargoyle for what we intended, but it does come into play later, so don't forget about it just yet. We then moved on to the main window panels. Caesar went up top and began mapping out the shape, whilst I went down the bottom and began mapping out the window frames. We decided that we would do one complete section of window and interior and stack it along to try and build up the cathedral as quickly as possible. You can see I went through several iterations of the clover design at the top, and that pattern is featured many times throughout the cathedral. I'm glad I taught myself how to do it early on. I then tried to use the gargoyle on the top, but as you can see it was a bit too big, so I custom built another one of a hooded figure with a sword inspired by the ring wraiths from Lord of the Rings. I then started mapping out the roof and went to lay on the second layer, however it was a bit too tall and a bit too close, so I extended it backwards a bit, and then shortened the roof way down. Once Caesar was working on the stained glass, his specialty, I moved on to the inside. However, this is where we get the first of many replay mod crashes, which happened at least 17 times in the project.
This is, not good.
Whenever replay mod crashed like this, the footage got corrupted, so we lost the building of everything you're seeing here, including Caesar's chandeliers, the angel statues, which come in very important later, the stained glass, once again done by Caesar, and Caesar's flying buttresses, which he insisted I put these in because he was so proud of them. And understandably so, I mean look at them, they're beautiful. But anyway, we then moved on to the side towers. Caesar started mapping out the side entrance while I went round doing pillars and windows on the side. I pulled many all-nighters in this project, and this was one of them. As you can see, as I lay out the window, I go for a triangular pattern, which later on ended up reminding me a bit of Darth Vader, but we deal with that. And it went through several different designs before I was happy with it. Once again, Caesar was my stained glass expert, but as he was asleep at this point, I had to do it myself. And you can see the birch signs left behind telling me to go to sleep from him, which are actually still in the downloadable version of the build on this one side of the cathedral. I started engraving into the pillars just to give them a bit more depth because I felt like just big stone faces were a bit and my gradient game still needs work. So I thought I'd engrave them rather than attempting gradients that I was still unfamiliar with. And here's the bit that ended up looking like Darth Vader, so you're welcome for that little Easter egg, it was unintentional. I then moved on to mapping out the main big window, and I set this one back a little bit to give it a bit more depth, and then started on the window frames again. I had a lot of reference images for these window frames, and you can find them all in the Pinterest board linked in the description below. The glass, once again, I had to do myself because Caesar wasn't here. I started off with a foresty design, but then went for a more simple sun rays because it just seemed a bit more appealing from far away. I then moved up to the next layer, doing a little transition line to try and blend it all together nicely. And then this was where the bell slats would go. Now you can see the little line going up there shows me where the world height limit was. This tower is over 300 blocks tall. This thing is massive. There's a reason why replay mod kept crashing. Once I'd entered in the 3 slats there, I began working on the top piece and then the corner pieces. I was debating putting gargoyles on here, but I was honestly sick of building them at this point, so I just went for little spires instead. I then built up a roof, slightly offset intentionally to break it up a little bit, as you can see the seam line in it there. I then moved down to this corner piece, and entered in one of the angel statues that I mentioned earlier. These are frequent throughout the build whenever I wanted to add a little bit of detail. I put a side window on there, built up the frame, and then did the base of it. I then built a huge sort of wall along the front and carved into it where the main doorway would go. This is what I feel is one of the most impressive parts of the build. It took quite a while to offset this one, as you can see, which thankfully is sped up. I then used World Edit to form a big circle for the rose windows. Now this rose window is not the most impressive in this build, that would go to the back one, but it was certainly the hardest to do because I'd never attempted one on this scale. And I was getting a bit lazy with stained glass because, once again, Caesar was unavailable, my stained glass expert. I built a little crown on the top and then did some peaks either side, which I then hid another angel statue inside of. I then also put a temporary design below the rose window, which I later changed because it looks awful, as you can see here. Again, all the reference images are available. I also then began to map out the top window frames slightly and had a little bit of a crisis about just how big a build I was making, which is why after doing this bit here, it just kind of stays still for a bit as I am sitting there debating what I'm doing with my life. But once I got over my crisis, I carried on building. I flipped it over to the other side, and then I began laying out this thing, which a user on Reddit helpfully pointed out looks a lot like the Star Trek logo. I hadn't seen it until they commented that, and now I can't unsee it. Thank you. Replay mod glitch once again, where I built the lower halves, and the gargoyles from the beginning come into play. They stand guard at every entrance. Caesar also did the floor, but of course, you know, glitches. We love them, don't we? I picked up where Caesar left off with the side doors and began mapping the door frames out for them. I added little alcoves, and we also stripped the wings off of the angel statues and made them saints, which you often see in real cathedrals standing guard over doorways. You can see there's two either side of the door and one in an alcove above. I engraved the pillars either side, flipped it over, and began a clover, nice rhyme there, in the middle of the triangle. I've forgotten the technical name. Someone will probably be upset with me for that. I don't care. We got the windows and the cloisters up above, which the ones on the main front I ended up using as part of the interior, but those ones don't really go anywhere. I led on to the side doors, and it took several attempts to get the side walls lined up at the right height. I filled in the space between them and then detailed it so it looked like a seamless transition. I then tried to flip the pillar around. That pillar was not made to be flipped 90 degrees. That was a struggle. It haunts my nightmares. And then I flipped the front side round again because I'm lazy. Caesar then rejoined me for this top peak, and he used maths for the first time in 3 years to make a hexagon, and he was very proud of himself for that. I put some detailing on the side and began work on the cloisters, or upper gallery I guess in this case, whilst Caesar went and built the window frame. The window shapes, I did the frames on the inside. We had some angled windows here which were difficult at this scale, but we got it covered. Caesar then worked his stained glass magic and accidentally implemented the bi flag into one of the windows, but shh, no one tell him. It's our little secret. I lit up the cloisters down below and put some torches. I would later add access to this, but that's so small that you can't really see it from this angle. I used the World Edit Ellipsis tool to make a dome on top, and then Caesar began putting spires around the edge whilst I did the ribbed vaulting on the outside. We couldn't put a spire on this unfortunately because of the world height, but I would have liked to. We then filled in the gaps, I put in some ribbing on the inside, and then began to light it up. And then I began making quite an interesting shape, I don't quite know how to describe it, in an attempt to try and blend in the hole in the roof with the rest of the walls. I think it turned out rather nicely, and it looks very floral from below, but it was a pain in the ass. We used the line command a lot. It was... oh god, and another replay mod glitch where I built the floor, which I am also very proud of, echoing the floral design of the area above, and the side passages, which, you know, were difficult to do. Anyway, I then started doing the interior of the front wall by bringing the walls in line with the indented door and put a gradual slope into the front windows. I then decorated that area and put some archways along the top. This was all sort of to break up the design a bit, make it feel not clustered, but like there was something going on there. I then built some Dark Souls inspired bridges, which are, in the cathedral scale, useless. It's basically a handrail, but you can walk along these and they do join the two halves of the cathedral. Here we have the pews that my partner very helpfully built, and I adapted slightly, adding some extra decorations and then pasted them in. I then started building the archways and the bridges that would hold the organ. Now I put them in and then I started decorating the pillar down the bottom. Engraving once again instead of gradients, because I still need to practice gradients. And then did some detailing on the archways, lit up the whole thing, and then flipped it across. I then began work on the organ. Unfortunately, this organ ended up looking rather flat because of the large scale. I promise it does have indents, it does have pillars that stick out at different angles, but because of the huge scale, it looks flat. It's not my best looking organ, but it certainly passes for what it needs to do in this build. Some of my smaller cathedrals have far, far better organs, but this one, it works. And I've watched this footage so many times that I hate it. I don't want to talk about the organ. It's the bane of my existence. You'll notice I was talking about gradients earlier. I did implement some onto the organ pipes. Those are intentional lighting details using iron blocks for the lightest parts going into andesite for the darkest areas. Again, I was using, well not again, I haven't mentioned this yet, but I was using vanilla textures because I wanted this build to be as accessible as possible. Usually in my builds I'll use Mizanos because it's far better in every way to the vanilla textures, but I wanted this build to be just easy to download. And once again, free download in the description. But yeah, that's the organ. I think it turned out okay. It's debatable. I then started working on a vicar's pew, which I saw again on Pinterest, as I see everything. Pinterest is my saving grace. And this one I spent a lot of time just staring at, trying to figure out what to do with it, which is why there's some periods of nothing happening. That's me once again questioning my life choices. I used the curve command to get the sweeping step of the shapes and then filled it in with the line command. I then started adding more details. I tried to use wood every so often in this build. You noticed it earlier in the church pews, it's now in this vicar platform, and it will later be in the choir pits too. Just to sort of bring it to life a little bit, make it seem more alive. I was then laying out the steps, I think. Yeah, I was putting the carpet on the steps, lighting them up, and then I started doing the banisters, which I then filled in with a checkered pattern. I did eventually plan to put a roof on that, but I didn't in the end because it didn't really need one. We then move outside. Sorry about the flickering here. Render distance. I was on max render distance and you can still barely render all of it in. I started doing a graveyard on the outside, building a few sample graves. We don't talk about the scale. For some reason, the people buried in these graves are far, far shorter than would be needed to sit on the pews on the inside, but that's not my problem. I added in some bushes as well, and some greenery. I then started building a lamppost that will be scattered around quite often, which I think is at a slightly more acceptable scale, but I was making things up as I went along, honestly. I brought it round, curving. Because of the curve, I had to build a lot of these arches by hand, but I think it turned out well in the end. It has a nice effect to it. I then used the curve command to join up all of the lampposts with a little ribbon. We then move around the very back of the cathedral, where I flip the pillars round and fill in the back for windows. Now, I was originally planning on doing a curved back, but have you seen the scale of this thing? And because it's curved, you have to do it mostly by hand. No, I'm not doing that. I then just filled in with a mixture of colours. Anyway, very cis colours mixed into that one, and did some detailing up above, did some overhangs, and did some little hangy down bits. I don't know their actual name. What do I look like, an archaeologist? Wrong profession? I'm losing my mind. Rose window. Yes, this is the best one in the entire build. This one took a while to get right, and it was again based off of a reference image in the Pinterest board. I made one shape, flipped it round, and then flipped it 45 degrees, and then had to correct it by hand, because flipping by 45 is imperfect in World Edit. With that, we then had the entire thing, and I built up the rest of the frames. And I was trying to follow the scale laid out by the windows below, but these had a 3-block center, whereas the below windows had a 2-block, so I had to do it again by hand. Another replay mod glitch skips out doing the stained glass. I then filtered in some more very not suspicious in any way colour schemes for the windows. And then we moved back outside, where I finished off the graveyard around the back. And again, sorry for the flashing rendering in and out. I wish there was a way to prevent this. I then moved around the front and filled in the doors because I was too lazy to do the interiors of the towers, and did the same on the inside and then lit it up afterwards instead of before, so you don't get to see me actually build it. And then I built the sundial that serves as spawn, applying one of the few gradients in the build from the copper to black. Finally, I moved on to the choir pits, once again being made from wood to help provide some variation. I built one panel and then stacked it up behind to do the second, and then built the back as close as I could to the reference image, and then I finally built the altar out of quartz this time with a gradient on it, you just can't really see it. And that's that. That's the entire build. Thank you for watching. I am incredibly proud of how this turned out. Be sure to download below, and be sure to check out my videos for future projects that I'll be working on. I have some big stuff in the works. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you enjoy.